Uh, Hello, these are the words for the wind for the weekend of September 15th. No, excuse me, September 5th and September 6th. I think that's correct. Some years ago, was meeting with Bishop Hying. I dissented from a number of aspects of our synod, the synod that the diocese under his leadership was doing. I dissented because after the first round, the conversations stopped, and you could only use language that had been prepared for you, supposedly summaries of the first round of candid conversation. And the prepared summaries, I believed, were heavily and deeply edited to sort of steer the results of the synod in certain predetermined directions. And Bishop Hying was very respectful and took me very seriously, and he listened carefully. But each time I went, I think he became a bit more frustrated with me. And I was in there one time, and one of my contentions was that there's a good deal of unacknowledged hurt among the clergy in the diocese and among the people of the diocese that manifests itself in not very healthy and productive ways. It manifests itself in a lot of passive-aggressive behavior. And I just believe that unless we honestly dealt with circumstances, the ultimate efforts of the synod would prove to be superficial, if that, and that there would not be any real substantive change. And so in a particular conversation, Bishop Hying said to me, we've all been hurt by the church, get over it, or something to that effect. And my initial reaction, of course, was to get the spotlight off of me and placate him and say, okay, all right, I'm over it and I'll quit, But I didn't do that, and I'm glad I didn't do that. I haven't done that for 25 years, I don't think, because I don't think it's, first of all, I don't think the church should be hurting people. I don't think that should be taken for granted or assumed that the church hurts people. We just have to get over it, as if a church that hurts people is normal, and I don't think it is. And I don't just mean in the Diocese of Gary, I mean all over. The church hurts people, and it hurts people because there are unacknowledged hurts among church people, particularly the clergy. And so today's gospel story is my belief is that it was a realization early on in the experience of people trying to form a church and be disciples of Christ. Early on, they realized that people could hurt one another, and that the remedy for that was direct face-to-face encounter, not passive-aggressive behavior, and not swallowing the hurt. And so in Matthew's gospel, Jesus has this formula laid out. If your brother sins against you, you go to your brother and confront him face to face. I'm paraphrasing. And if he realizes it and acknowledges it, the hurt that he gave you, you've acknowledged the hurt and he's acknowledged it, then there can be healing. If your brother doesn't acknowledge it, take 2 or 3 witnesses and have them disclose the facts of the matter. And then if that doesn't work, then you go to the whole church. Because I think Matthew realized it was crucial that disciples of Christ acknowledge the sins. And I don't think, remember that sin is not what we were taught in the 3rd grade. Sin was the incompleteness of creation, not something awful and terrible. I mean, and the incompletion of creation could manifest itself in people's ignorance, when they were ignorant of the truth or the goodness or the beauty of something. When they were ignorant of that truth, then they would sin, and it needed to be pointed out to them, not in a imperial kind of way, but in a one-on-one kind of way. At least begin with that. Matthew's gospel is problematic today. Something you find there that you would not find in John. And Matthew is considered, at least in my teaching, to be the first gospel written, coming out of a very heavy Jewish sin-centered animal sacrifice kind of mindset, not at all a God of love. But by the time you get to John's gospel, 30, 40 years after Matthew's experience, John's pretty clear that God is an intimate source of love, not only for human beings, but for all of creation. In John's gospel, there is no scarcity and there is no envy. There's only abundance and fullness. But you don't have to agree with me, but that's how I put my thinking together. And so, because Matthew goes on and says, well, if this person doesn't acknowledge their hurt, doesn't acknowledge that they've hurt you or their sin, their incompleteness, their ignorance, then you can expel them and treat them like a Gentile or a tax collector, which I think you would not at all find that in John. I mean, it's just not there, because it gives permission to demonize, and Jesus never marginalized or demonized anybody except religious leadership. He confronted them, and of course they didn't like that confrontation. They didn't like that encounter. Ultimately, that's why he suffers, dies, and ultimately then is resurrected by the Father. So acknowledging hurt is a pretty important thing, because until it's acknowledged, the hurt person continues to transmit that hurt, more than likely, and the hurts then become institutionalized. And so you have, a long legacy in Catholicism, first of all, of bloodshed during the Crusades and the Inquisition, when Catholics thought they knew everything and they had this right to kill people in the name of God. And then in the colonial expansion of Catholic nations into the Americas, they had this conviction that they had a right to kill people if they didn't acquiesce to the Church's understanding of the world. Those are terrible legacies that need to be acknowledged. And in our own country today, we're experiencing incredible turmoil, chaos even. I'm not going to shy away from it in some of those cities, and there's not an easy solution. You're not going to resolve violence with violence. I mean, and you're not going to tame force with force. There needs to be honest human encounter, and that's what many of those demonstrations attempt to do. But we have such little skill in reconciliation that it's very hard for those attempts to gain any traction. I mean, it's going to be a long time and a lot more chaos and suffering, I'm afraid, until we find the patience and the language to deal with this in a human and humane way. But in the Church too. I mean, this coming Wednesday, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops is calling for a day of fasting and prayer for the sin of racism and so on. And Bishop McClory wrote a very nice letter, and I have no problem with that. It's prayer and fasting is good, but we need to, as an institution, the Church needs to look at itself. Do we want to have a bishop, a relatively young man, just take for granted that the Church hurts everybody, at least hurts all priests? I just don't think that's healthy. I mean, that's what has led to the awful enabling of terribly hurt men who then perpetuated that hurt by hurting children and taking advantage of them and abusing them sexually, and seeking intimacy where it was not to be sought. I mean, it's not healthy. But that was enabled for years and years and years, and it goes on. I mean, alcoholism among the clergy used to be the the curse of unreconciled and unacknowledged hurt. Today, I think it's probably more obesity. And I'm not setting myself up as any kind of paragon, believe me, but I have acknowledged that I have been hurt by the church. And I say that, and I think that that's a step towards healthiness. But we can't keep hurting people. You can't get married because of this arbitrary reason, or you can't have your baby baptized because of this arbitrary reason, or you can't, we won't do a funeral for your loved one because of, you didn't use your envelopes or something like that. I mean, those are unnecessary hurts that come from hurts, I believe. And until the church, locally and nationally and globally, openly confronts the fact that we have hurt and we have been hurt, I'm not so sure that things are going to get much better, especially as we begin to see what the future is going to hold for the church. I just don't think a lot of people are going to buy back into any institution that wants to hurt them. Christ, in the gospel, as I pointed out in the homily at 10:30 Mass, in our being exposed to Matthew's gospel, they leave out a whole chunk of stuff and get cut to this chase today, because after Jesus tells them they can treat them as tax collectors and Gentiles, he says that whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. And of course, that's taken as the commission that Jesus gives, that the church has the power to condemn people. I don't think that's what Matthew intended. I don't think Matthew intended to relay the fact that Jesus said the church can condemn people. The church is human, frail, incomplete, and faulted like anybody else. I think that what Matthew was talking about was that every single one of us has the capacity to make heaven on earth in how we deal with one another, and especially in how we deal with ourselves. And if we allow ourselves to have our hurts fester inside of us, our shame at the hands of the church, our marginalization at the hands of the church, if we allow that to fester inside of us, then we in turn are going to transmit that to people, and how we deal with them and how we continue to hurt them. It's not our job to be a prosecuting attorney in the world, I don't think, and look at people and decide without any conversation or any encounter, human encounter, that they are unworthy of the church's sacramental ministry, or unworthy of the church's willingness to bless them. And I'm not, all kinds of people, you turn away a family from a funeral and you've done damage for generations. You don't baptize a baby. In this day and age, when people are so raw and stressed, you deny a baby a baptism and you've done generational harm, I think. Peace be with you.